Greetings and welcome to the Forest Therapeutic Podcast with your host. I'm Dr. B.
Dr. LaKeith.
And of course, Dr. Gigi is on vacation this weekend. Gigi, have a safe trip. Enjoy yourself. And as usual, like, comment, subscribe, and hit that share button. Also hit that little bell notification icon on the top. That way you get notifications when we drop new episodes. Also, if you're ever in need of therapeutic services for mental health, please look for us at www.foresttherapeutic.org. All right, now getting into today's episode, we're going to talk about something that's been going on in the media today, vicarious trauma. And in the beginning, I kind of want to lay the foundation and set the tone of how everything's going to go. So I'm going to open up with a friendly definition of systemic racism. Get my notes up here. So we're going to work with a definition of systemic racism straight out of Webster's dictionary. I actually have my own operational definition that I use when I'm doing research, but I don't want to go that deep into the weeds in this episode. Okay, we could say that for a different episode. Y'all are going to love that operational definition, by the way. Yeah. But I want to use a more user-friendly version that more people can, I don't want to say the word keep up with, but they can easily go and find and understand. Yeah. So, according to Webster's dictionary, systemic racism refers to racism embedded across an entire society through laws, policies, institutional practices, and cultural norms that produce persistent racial inequality. So, little brother, when I think of systemic racism, I tend to operate from Neely Fuller and Cress Westling's definition of systemic racism, where they have a concept called the 10 areas of human activity. And in those 10 areas of human activity, what people need to know is that those are the actual systems in play that touch every aspect of a person's life throughout their lifespan when they live in a society or within a given culture, right? They're interconnected, so they're not necessarily isolated in a silo. They tend to touch, or oftentimes within their structure, they will actually overlap. And those 10 areas, I actually found that for everybody, so that way everybody can understand exactly what those 10 areas are. Those 10 areas include economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, war, and health. So those are the 10 areas, sorry everybody. Those are the 10 areas in which our lives touch the systems that we deal with. Yeah. I just want to open the floor for you to say something. If you had something you wanted to say, I can keep going, go a little bit further.
No, you're right, because I will say this about systemic racism. I know we live in a time where some people want to argue against it because it's a hard thing to digest, to think that you were raised in a country with a culture that unconsciously has these practices that are biased against people, so much so that you deny it and you get in defense of it, but it's very much real. And it always makes me want to point certain things out to people, to where, so like, we had laws on the books for 200 plus years that said that people based off of their skin color have to sit here, they can't sit there, or they can bank here. Exactly. They can't bank here, they have to bank there. And even when we talk about systemic oppression, even if it's too difficult to digest with racism, I always like to point out to people, you can apply it to almost any marginalized group. Like, for instance, women could not even get their own checking accounts until 1974, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1970s. So when you say that to people, it perplexes them. They don't want to believe the reality that, oppression could be a part of the American experience or culture, because, we know that happened, but we're so far removed from it. And that always makes me want to pause and explain to people that that's the power of culture. Culture normalizes why we live the way that we live in ways that are unspoken. So much so that we get to the defense of it because we're like, well, we've always done this and this always worked in our favor. We've always had some sort of opportunity or freedom to come along with it, that we never pause to think to ourselves, well, is that a universal truth for everybody?
No, I agree with that, because we're going to get into ideology here in a second, but you're right. Culture shapes the way. Culture is the frame in which all of us look at reality to have a somewhat shared understanding. Meaning, like, when I look at X, society, and with the culture within the society we come from, has an expectation of how X should go. Literally, when you interact with the post office, the grocery store, even casual conversations when you meet somebody for the first time. One cultural norm among everybody in America is the person that walks into the room greets the room.
Exactly.
Right? That's literally what culture does. It defines reality and what those expectations are. I think that, not going off tangent but within topic, I think one of the reasons why, and I haven't looked into it, but if I was to use my educated guess, a lot of times people deny it because of the dissonance or the sheer feeling of being overwhelmed by it. Like, for instance, if you are a white person in America who denies systemic racism, I would imagine that there's a level of dissonance because you identify with America to the point that you see yourself in all the images and the teachings and things like that. When you look at a history book, you see white faces. When you look at your movie stars and the heroes in the media, you see white faces. When you see all these great accomplishments that are plastered across the American culture, it's a white face. But then here come black people and other minority groups saying, no, there's an issue here, there's an issue here, there's an issue here. And then all of a sudden there's the dissonance of, well, wait, I agree with those things. I believe in those things. I'm not an issue. I'm not an issue. They're not an issue. I think that there's that level of dissonance there where it's like, nah, that can't be it because that's a reflection of me. And then for those minorities who've internalized white supremacy, and we'll talk about that here in a second, there's a level, in my opinion, of overwhelming that this system is just too vast to change. Like, we literally just laid out 10 systems, the 10 systems that touch every area of your life, the quote unquote, the government or whatever you want to label it, that sounds like too vast of an apparatus to change. So I think that when people deny it, it's not just those two categories, but I'm just spitballing off the top of my head. I can imagine it's dissonance, overwhelmingness, whatever it may be. So that's what I thought of when you said that.
I'm going to say what I want to say for white supremacy, because to your point, that is something that's very much widespread in ways that people don't even really realize. Because when people think about white supremacy, they think about neo-Nazis, they think about the Ku Klux Klan, they think about
overt racism.
Exactly. Yeah. Not necessarily realizing that white supremacy is also, and I'll say this quickly and then we get to the point. White supremacy, in my opinion, is Candace Owens saying that, well, black people got civilized because of colonization, and we should be thankful for the fact that we got civilized.
You know, I agree with you. That's a separate episode. I really do think that's a separate episode.
It is.
I agree with it because when you gave Candace Owens as an example, that's an example of a black person, in my opinion, that's internalized oppression or racism to themselves, and now they're doing quote unquote the devil's work. They're now perpetuating the ideology of white supremacy. So yes, and what I was getting at was, and I'm glad you said that, when people think of like white supremacy, you're right, they think of Ku Klux Klan, cross burning, slavery. They think of the overt racism
versus the complexities of it.
Right, but they never consider the covert parts of it, which is the next part of what we're about to get into, which is the institutional racism. But when I refer to the covert part of it, a Nazi is not gonna goose step and zig howl. A Ku Klux Klan member is not going to put a hood on their face. Yeah. Like, they looked at the same history we looked at and went, yeah, people don't like that. But that's a template for us to understand and see, like, this is what they did. And then you look for similarities. So a lot of times when people go, well, no, that's not necessarily racism. Well, the same people who I'm researching to understand what is racism, the descendants of them, or the people who practice it, they did the same research and was like, yeah, I'm not going to do it the exact same way. Yeah. So when I say overt racism, what I'm saying is overt racism in America in modern times has never been, I'm not going to say the word never. It's typically considered tasteless. Yeah. So it's not okay. Donald Trump has come along and kind of changed that a little bit, where overt racism is considered to be, that's just the white man speaking up and taking charge. But by and large, in modern times, overt racism that we've seen is typically considered tasteless. But covert racism has always been acceptable in the American culture, in my opinion. And when I say covert, I'm actually talking about institutional and structural racism. Yeah. So I'm going to go, did you have anything you want to say before I give the definition of institutional racism?
No, I was going to say, it's funny that you mentioned that, because literally yesterday we have this uproar with Donald Trump posting this video on Truth Social that he deferred to saying, well, the White House the first saying like, oh no, it was an intern that inappropriately or mistakenly posted this video.
That's a lie.
Where 100% agree it's a lie.
It's definitely him.
Where at the end of the video, it's supposed to be Lion King based, where it just so happened conveniently Michelle Obama and Barack Obama faces are transposed on the bodies of apes. And of course, it's like, oh, well, you guys are making a big deal out of this. This was produced a year ago. You guys are just looking for something to be mad about. Spare me the
fake outrage.
The fake outrage.
Business as usual.
As if, one, we don't know the history of black people throughout the world, specifically in America, being compared to animals, and particularly apes.
Correct.
So even if it was a situation where it's like, well, it was supposed to, all these different Democratic leaders were, their face were posted on bodies of different animals, it still perplexes me, or not even perplexes me, it doesn't surprise me. It still makes me look at them sideways, as in like, you guys aren't smart, but you guys aren't ignorant enough to understand the connection between black people being compared to monkeys, to where as though this video gets posted. Right. And you guys say like, well, it was initially saying like, spare me the fake outrage, and then initially saying, well, sorry, an intern improperly posted this video. That was not by mistake. That was not by accident. And even if you guys, let's say, unconsciously didn't realize that, it's just the fact that you guys unconsciously didn't think about the representation of black faces on the bodies of monkeys.
Yeah, I think that the media doing the gaslighting thing, when I say business as usual, and we'll get into that later on as well, yeah, it's an institutional practice for the system of media. Literally, oh, well, let me just, don't believe your lying eyes. That's not our intention. That's not what we meant. Regardless of the fact that there were no apes or gorillas in The Lion King. But to your point, historically, the racist trope of depicting black people as subhuman and similar to apes is a very well-known thing. It's literally like dog whistling, how dog whistling used to be a thing. We all know when a politician is dog whistling, it's just an opportunity for them to scapegoat out of it. But to your point, yeah, there's that level of denial where I'm gonna gaslight you. Don't believe your eyes. It was just a staffer. We all know it wasn't a staffer. That man was a staffer's texting in what, 2 in the morning? Like, come on.
Around that time, 11 o'clock at night. And for me personally, I'm just, when I heard that, I was like, that's so interesting, because now you guys want to default it to a staffer, but when he posts any other content, thought, ideology, or whatever, like for instance, telling Pam Bondi that, we need to go after these particular people, it's never defaulted to a staffer. It's just in this particular instance where you've been getting blowback both from the Democratic side, but also your own side, the Republicans, that all of a sudden now it's like, oh, it's an intern mid-air.
Yeah, no, that's... Our White House and the current administration is a reflection of the current president, who is a pathological, narcissistic, cognitively declining individual who is extremely, extremely racist. So that's all that is. So what they're going to do, his mindset is always never admit that you're wrong. I hit the wrong button, everybody. I apologize. I meant to silence my watch. His mindset is never admit that I'm wrong. And he doesn't. He never admits when he's wrong. He will never admit when he's wrong, because that's just how he's been conditioned to be. But I do want to go on to the definition of institutional racism. Yeah. So institutional racism, now keep in mind, everybody, there's actually 3 levels of it, and we're going to unpack that in a later episode. There's systemic racism, there's structural racism, and there's institutional racism. With systemic racism, we've already gone over those 10 areas of the systems that we deal with that interconnect with one another. Institutional racism it refers to discriminatory policies, practices, and outcomes within a specific institution that disproportionately affects members of a certain racial or ethnic group. So when I think of institutional racisms, those are the actual organizations of those systems that you interact with. So when we say law, what are we talking about? The legal system itself, law enforcement as far as police, going to court to deal with lawyers and judges, dealing with the magistrate, being on probation. That is the actual institution that represents the system of law. Yeah. When I refer to the media, where do you consume your media? Is it traditional media like
Newspapers.
I was going to say, I had a preference because if you look at Fox News, I don't know why, but Fox News, CNN, do you get it from independent media?
Yeah.
Do you get it from newspaper? Do you get it from social media? Those are the institutions in which you interact with. So when we say institutional racism, it's when you actually interact with that institution and end up on the receiving end of a racial practice or a racial policy. Like, for instance, one institutional practice, I guess, would be redlining. That's the most historical one, right?
Yeah.
Or another one would be, well, it's another banking one, denying like housing appraisals, purposely decreasing housing appraisals when you believe the homeowners to be black versus being white. That happened within like literally the past 3 to 4 years. That was a breaking story that was going around everywhere. Things like that. So when it comes to institutional racism, that's what we're referring to. That's where you're actually going and interacting with those institutions that represents those systems.
Agree. It's like when we talk about institutional racism, and before I say this, I don't justify the killing of anyone because of their own political views. That's always 100% wrong. Period. But when we're talking about systemic racism, it's when a Charlie Kirk wants to go and present the point of, well, black people make up 30% of the population, but they also make up 50% of the people who commit crime or are convicted of crime in America.
Which is ridiculous, because that's not what that study said.
Exactly. Systemic racism would have you believe that because it takes information out of context. Because in that data, what it is this: arrests do not equal convictions. Correct. Only thing that shows is that black people are more likely to be policed.
Or disproportionately policed and arrested.
Exactly. And then also what I love about that particular thing, not that I say it sarcastically, is when he would throw out that piece of information, he would also conveniently leave out that black people also make up between 50 to 60% of people who are exonerated. In other words, people who were arrested, convicted for crimes, then later on found out to be completely innocent because the evidence didn't hold up. And usually in those cases, they were up against a criminal justice system that did not do its due diligence, a biased jury, and a variety of other factors that say like, oh, well, we need to railroad this person and convict them, only to later on say like, well, now we have our doubts because the evidence doesn't necessarily show that this person did this. Black people, and I want you guys to think about that. Black people, and this is within the criminal justice system, make up 50 to 60% of those who are exonerated. People who are wrongfully convicted
and found to be innocent later on.
Exactly. That's what I mean when we're talking about systemic racism, because systemic racism would have you believe that based off of numbers are misinterpreted that, oh, this group, in this case we're talking about black folks, are more likely to commit crime and they are guilty, until you realize that, oh, wait, there's a system in place that criminalizes black people and it will do whatever it needs to do to make that narrative sound like it's true, even if it's overly policing or arresting black people, and even if later on we find out, oh, actually they're completely innocent.
Yeah, correct. So what you were saying right there, just to piggyback off of that, is more context of systemic racism creates the chronically traumatizing environment in which people who are marginalized live in. Dr. B, what does all that mean? Systemic racism creates the ghettos, the disproportionality, all of the setbacks that minority groups, specifically black people, tend to deal with. When I say chronic, I mean it's ongoing and perpetuating, meaning that because of the way that the laws and the policies are written, that's the structural part, it constantly keeps those who are disenfranchised, black and brown people, poor people, siloed off into lower parts of society. And then when you go to the institutional racism, that's the personal encountering part. That's the part that builds the mistrust. That's the part that builds the negative expectations and the hypervigilance. Institutional racism, an example of it is black people being pulled over in a traffic stop by law enforcement. There's literally an expectation about that. So much so when we interact with that institution, interacting with law enforcement and the criminal justice system, Black parents have to have what's called the talk with their black sons about what you need to do during a traffic stop. Because we know that disproportionately we are targeted. We're not given the benefit of the doubt. And even when we're innocent, they'll find a way or a reason if they're having a bad day to arrest us. So I just wanted to piggyback off of what you're saying, because there it is with what you were saying with that study of, now we get statistical data that shows that black people are arrested for 50% of the violent crimes. Not that they commit them. There's a disproportionality because of the negative historical interaction that we have with law enforcement, not as a byproduct of our own. It's the environment systemically that created it for us. So when we say systemically created, we're saying those overlapping systems have had a negative impact on us personally and at a communal level, and then even at a macro national level. Because like Keith was saying, there is now a cultural expectation or depiction of how black people are criminal, violent, evil. There has to be a dehumanization process in order to justify the way that you treat black people, according to Amos Wilson. I just want to put that out there. And
I'll just give a slight example, and you guys can definitely look it up for yourselves because it's out there in the public. And the reason why I mention this is because it's very much connected to us. Public housing.
Yes.
Public housing, initially, if you look at the history of it, was started post-World War II, right? So the majority of people who made up public housing post-World War II were white people. And it was with the understanding of like, okay, here you have this community of people post-war that are struggling. They want to live the American dream, own their own houses, live in certain neighborhoods and whatnot. So the federal government completely went in as far as making sure like, okay, we fund this. We do what we need to do. When public housing got integrated, that's when you start seeing the stereotypes that we have now, and the defunding of public housing started to go downward, right? Because I want you guys to really think about the history of public housing as far as like how public housing was specifically created for white people. It was not created for black folks. It wasn't until we got integrated that all of a sudden public housing starts taking on this different connotation, being condemned and underfunded, right? As far as like becoming this negative thing. And that's the biggest thing about, I will say about public housing, when we talk about systemic racism, what we can realize is this. Public housing failed, and the issues that everyone likes to talk about with public housing was a result of the federal government divesting from public housing, because whether the federal government liked to say it out loud or not, the blacker that it became, the less it felt like it needed to offer. And that was through the 1940s, to the 50s, to the 60s, all the way through the 70s and 80s and 90s, when things, particularly in the 70s onward, got really bad. So we're talking about systemic racism. We're talking about when the system decides, okay, when we want to extend support in these programs or systems that we created versus when we want to start divesting from them, so that we can create a narrative as and see they're the problem. We gave them housing, which subpar housing, because public housing, most people don't realize, the federal government's your landlord. So anything that happens to said property when it becomes unlivable, it's the responsibility of the federal government to fix. It's subpar housing that these people are living here, and they created it, and this is where they want to be, and they're acting this way, so it clearly must be something wrong with them. Not necessarily looking at the system and taking the data that the system records of itself, saying, well, we took out this amount of money this year, we took out more money this year, we took out more money this year, and we're not able to fix these properties because we took more money out. So therefore now we have this huge backlog of repair maintenance that we cannot afford to fix because we're not funding the states and the jurisdictions that are responsible for overseeing public housing, which is usually your local housing authority. That's when we talk about systemic racism. It decides who gets funding, who gets support, what that funding is going to look like. To where as though if we give funding to this particular group, it's respectable because they deserve it. But then when a different group starts moving in, why are we funding this? And we look for justifications as to why we shouldn't fund it, and even try to figure out ways to demonize the people that live in those situations, when the reality situation is, across racial groups, when you put people in situations of poverty or people experiencing poverty, there are problems that are very similar. The only thing that makes it different is if we're talking about racial groups. When we start adding race as a component, then it takes a different color, because then it becomes a justification of who are the impoverished that should be sympathized with, and who are the impoverished where it's kind of like, well, you brought this on yourself. You're not working hard enough.
You know, that's an ideological viewpoint that you just laid out. Like literally the color caste system, as it was, like the institution of public housing, right? That falls within the category, I would imagine, in economics, right? You come across public housing, and of course, when black people start getting there, well, we're going to stop funneling so much money to the black communities.
Because we want you guys to work. You guys aren't working hard enough. We want you to, whatever the narrative that we decide where we want to put a fund in.
Yeah, but then if you look at it from a broader perspective, like that's why critical thinking is really important.
Facts.
Most public housing that goes towards black people are within black communities. Black communities, as we talked about last season, are siloed off into ghettos. Ghettos specifically do not have opportunities in them for economic development, investment, things like that.
It's funny that you mentioned.
I didn't mean to cut you off. So therefore, you're saying that, oh, well, we gave them housing, they didn't find any jobs. Well, you got to look at the totality of the person. Can you imagine a single mom who's in public housing, who doesn't have access to a vehicle because they can't afford a vehicle?
Yeah.
So they have to rely on public transportation, but they can't go too far. So now they got to get up, get their kids to school in the morning on public transportation, and then catch a bus to work in a minimum wage or low paying job. The minimum wage has not matched the rate of inflation in decades. So she's in public housing, she's actually going to work, she's putting her kids in school, but she doesn't make enough money economically to even pull herself out of public housing. So then some people would say what? She should go to school and then do what? Take out student loans. So then she takes out student loans, but even then with a college degree, minimum wage is still not matching the inflation or the cost of living. So then what's she supposed to do? Take out loans to get a master's degree.
Facts.
Still not getting paid enough. But even then, most people don't make it that far because now they're burnt out. So then she keeps working. She's stuck within the system, within the neighborhood, because she can't go too far in order to pull herself out of it, because in her local community, there's just not enough economic opportunities. And we didn't even get into hospitals, grocery stores, safety. Do law enforcement respond in time? When law enforcement shows up, are they friendly or are they, hostile and aggressive? We haven't even gotten into those topics, but at a micro level, at an individual level, that is what we mean by it creates that environment. Now, that might not be your environment, but we actually grew up in a similar environment, and that's the reality for a lot of people.
When we talk about systemic racism, even how certain things are built. So for instance, if we're talking about Washington, D.C., where we grew up, proud D.C. natives, 7 generations on our mother's side. How certain houses, public housing is set up because they knew they were building for black folks. So for instance, one of the most famous, and I guess notorious, even though no longer exists, Berry Farms. It's no coincidence that Berry Farms was built where it was built. Why? Because 295 cuts it off from the rest of the city. 295 pretty much cuts off Ward 7 and Ward 8 from the rest of the city, where like literally now we say east of the river, right? Where we grew up.
Which is a crazy name.
Exactly. So Berry Farms is pretty much cut off by 295, and then you have to come up Martin Luther King Avenue, right, to get through it, right? And even when you think about where we grew up in a place called Starter Terrace. Starter Terrace is right off of Minnesota Avenue and Ridge Road. But what cuts Starter Terrace off, and also Banneker Ridge, which is across the street from us, is the fact that you have East Capitol cutting through it. Because it takes you from RFK Stadium all the way over to Central Avenue to Maryland, but you have East Capitol cutting you off to whereas though East Capitol's there, and if you decide you want to go further down, 295 also cuts you off, and then Pennsylvania Avenue going out into Maryland cuts you off. And if you don't believe me, also think about this: Potomac Gardens over in Eastern Market, technically Capitol Hills, right?
Most hood place I ever been is.
What did they do to those people in Potomac Gardens?
No, I wasn't talking about Potomac Gardens. That's not the most hood place I've ever been.
No, but here's the thing: what they do. Let me tell you what they did with Potomac Gardens. When they started realizing that Potomac Gardens is pretty much being absorbed by Capitol Hill, Eastern Market, what did they do? They built steel fences around the public housing. That's Potomac Gardens. If you go to Howard University, behind Howard University, there's public housing. La Detroit. You don't know Detroit doesn't. You don't even know that Detroit does this unless you happen to wander back there. But it's cut off because you have Howard in front of it and the hospital in front of it, and then behind it you have some more prestigious, wonderful, beautiful row homes. What I'm saying is that when public housing gets built, and particularly when it gets built for people of color, you end up in sections of the city where like you're cut off.
Yeah.
Now you may reap the benefits because maybe some more affluent aspects of a neighborhood exist around you, but you are completely cut off because even if those affluent aspects get built, so for instance, if I'm living behind Howard University in Detroit Park, it's wonderful to have all those restaurants. It's wonderful that a Whole Foods or a because the CVS still there too, is there too. But the reality situation, what good does that do me where it's like, that's really expensive?
Hey, what I was going to say earlier was that Quarles Street is the most hood place I ever been to. When I was in high school, I used to work at a Domino's on Minnesota Avenue? Or was that a Pizza Hut? The one that's replaced.
It depends, because to your point, there was a Pizza Hut and Domino's.
It was a Domino's. It was Domino's at the time. I was delivering pizza for Domino's, and off of Kenilworth Avenue, if you're heading towards the Maryland side, so that's if you're heading north, to the left is Quarles Street. You wouldn't know it's there because it's in the back, but like you said, it's cut off by 295 on the as it becomes Kenilworth Avenue. That is the most hood place I ever been to. And even our neighborhood where we lived at, off of Minnesota Avenue on Ridge Road, where we grew up at, it's still sectioned off into its own little pocket. You can go down Benning Road, but after you go over the overpass that goes over Kenilworth Avenue, you're now in the projects area.
Exactly.
You just are. And so it's just even more sectioned off, to your point. And an experience I want to share, I want to say it was me and Eddie. Me and Eddie were driving to Upper Northwest near the Gold Coast to drop somebody off.
Who's Eddie?
Eddie's my best friend. Eddie's like a best friend that I've known for over a decade now. When we were younger, we were dropping somebody off, and on the way back, I'll never forget this. We was in the right lane, and there was the jump outs at the time. I literally looked out of my rear view mirror and saw we were in the right lane. There's a car behind us. The jump outs were in the left lane next to that car, trying to tell them to slow down and back up. I said, Eddie, we about to get pulled over. He was like, for real? I was like, yes. They pull up behind us. See, we're young at the time. Like I'm like either 19 or early 20s, whatever it is. And pull us over, tell us to get out of the car. Complete violation of my civil rights. Just complete violation. Pull us out of the car, have us sit on the ground, and they actually searched the car. Didn't even ask, looked at our driver's license. It's because it had our southeast address on it. We were staying at 18 on the Cottsdale Road at the time. And it was, what are you doing up here? That's literally what they said. Like, what are you doing around here? We just dropped somebody off and we heading back to our side of town. He was like, all right, get back down there, don't come back up here again. It was white cops telling us that. That's our interaction with law enforcement. We're literally dropping someone off. Wasn't speeding, wasn't doing anything. So 2 black men in the car pulled us over, pulled us out of the car, even had to sit on the curb and everything else. But it was par for the course. I became desensitized to it. We even took another story I'll share where everybody is. Me and my friends was taking a trip to, I think it was Ocean City. It was a beach somewhere. It was us and we were following a group of girls. We got pulled over. They pulled us out of the car, told us to get out of the car. They brought the search dog, sniffed the car, opened the door, checked the car, looked me dead in my face and said, am I gonna find weed in the car? I was actually irritated at this point. I was like, no. And then in my head, I'm like, I'm hoping they ain't got because people I was riding with, I was like,
It could be a possibility.
because I was so irritated. I was like, no. Now I know exactly why you pulled us over. In my head, I'm like, I hope that I didn't have it on me. I was like, I hope they ain't got nothing on me. Long story short, we didn't have anything on us. We were just going down there to have a good time, got pulled over. They just completely put us out of the car, had the dogs come out. So that's my own personal interaction when it comes to institutional racism dealing with law enforcement. And to your point, our personal interaction of where we lived at. We're not just giving you fancy words for the sake of giving you fancy words. We actually lived in public housing. Most of you who are in Washington, D.C., we literally lived down the street from 37th Street in our last home in section housing in D.C. off of Ridge Road, right across across from the open field when you go up Ridge Road towards Texas Avenue. We literally lived across from the open field and the Section 8 houses right there. So we have this lived experience of having to go back to our area of the city, having to go back and catch the orange line in order to go back to Minnesota Avenue to go back to the projects, how it is truly sectioned off, how there aren't really a lot of grocery stores and opportunities around there.
The Murrays.
The Murrays, yeah, the Murrays.
Now it's
yeah. If you lived in Minnesota Avenue, off of Minnesota Avenue on Ridge Road, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are no high-paying jobs within walking distance of that place. You got to catch the metro to go downtown. You got to catch the bus in order to go up Benning Road just to hit where all the opportunities are. You may have to travel all the way to Maryland. Or Virginia. There's no opportunities in that area. So when I gave the example of a woman not having a vehicle to drive, that wasn't our example. We've seen people like that. How are you going to live in an area like that when you're trying to work and be a contributing member of society, but there's no opportunities in your backyard? Like, you're going to have to what? And then you have children? And then some people can say, well, why would you have kids? You don't know the backstory of how that relationship fell out. You don't know, maybe she chose wrong. Maybe it was one guy they both had, maybe she was married, had 2 kids, and then the husband passed away. That is a thing. Like, literally, they could have had a happy life. He passed away. They fell on hard economic times. Maybe she was a stay-at-home wife who relied on her husband, and he left. And now she's trying to rebuild her life again. So to everybody's point, these are real world examples of when we say systemic racism to institutional racism down to the individual level, these are real lived experience here that we've seen in our communities. And we didn't even get into the whole, because of the lack of opportunities in their communities, people turn to crime.
Facts.
Like, what is, you can't silo people off, let them see what success, wealth, and prosperity look like, deny it to them, gaslight them in their face, and then tell them, well, you got to figure out how to survive, and then say, oh, well, y'all shouldn't be selling drugs. There are no opportunities here. Literally, the research shows when communities have actual opportunities, crime tends to go down because they're able to go to work. They're able to sustain jobs. So I just wanted to say, did you have any other thoughts or experiences you want to share on that one?
Only thing I would say is we should do an episode talking about growing up in Southeast, juxtaposed, being fortunate enough to attend Catholic school and the culture shock that came along with that, but that's a separate episode.
Yeah, I would even let it talk about like the difference between living in Northwest versus living in Southeast. It's a big difference. It's a completely big difference.
It was.
Yeah, it's a same city, different culture. So the definition of white supremacy. White supremacy is the belief that white people constitute a superior race and should therefore dominate society, typically to the exclusion and detriment of other racial and ethnic groups. Everybody, what I want to tell you about white supremacy is this. This is the engine that powers racism. It is the engine that powers systemic racism. It is a part of the American culture. I saw this meme the other day. It was beautiful. Literally the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. When you think about, I know, right? Think about this. Here's an example of white supremacy and its insidious nature interwoven into the fabric of our culture. We are taught to believe that Goldilocks is the protagonist of that story. Lo and behold,
she broke into someone's house.
She broke into someone's house.
Ate their food.
Slept in their bed. Ran through their house. But we're supposed to believe this blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl is innocent. That's crazy. And these 3 brown bears might potentially harm her when they find out. I say that to say this. When it comes to white supremacy being the core that powers racism, it's literally that white is right and everything else is wrong. When you listen to certain white people on social media and historically, they do not want to lose a white ethno-state. When people say white ethno-state, they want a predominantly white culture. They do not want to lose their white history. Within America, they want a predominantly white Christian history. So they don't want to lose their whiteness. They don't want to lose their faith. When I say that powers systemic racism, institutional racism, and structural racism, at the core of the policies and the systems and everything that's created, whiteness is centered there. Whiteness in its purest as driven snow, in air quotes, greatest form is there. Therefore, the perpetuation of white dominance is there. Giving out the benefit of the doubt is there. The opportunities given them out is there. Putting them in a better position to succeed is there. That is what we mean by white supremacy, being the powering mechanism to systemic racism.
Well, to your point, that to me became even more evident now that we live in the era of the Great Replacement theory. Which will now you have white people unapologetically feeling like, oh, well, there's this agenda to completely replace the white race in America, and they're doing it through the way of trying to guilt us and make us feel as though our culture is problematic, when our culture is the reason why America came into existence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And not allowing them to have some more nuanced conversations and saying two things can be true. Yes, European culture and ideology did lead to this creation that is United States of America, but also simultaneously also saying that that also has been very problematic.
Very much so.
As in, like, you can't hold space for two things to be true. As in, like, yes, this thing that is America that we live in would not be in existence had you guys not had colonized, 100%. But also not wanting to reflect upon the fact that that colonization came at a great cost of the people.
But I didn't mean to cut you off. I think that is the core of it. You cannot, white supremacy, and another way of looking at it is about white genetic and cultural survival and dominance.
Exactly.
So therefore, I have to paint it as I am benevolent, I am good, I am superior. So you're right. Two things can be true at one time, but the reason why I think that it's often pushes out like the colonization, slavery, and everything else is because if I did those things, then I am not good. If I did those things, then I am bad. If I did those things, then I might be the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's why I just wanted to point that out. Like, at its core, in my opinion, it's genetic and cultural survival. Therefore, anything that's not me has to be deviant. Like, black people are a stain and a smear on white supremacy, simply because our existence and our history and interaction with it prove that it is a fallacy and flawed.
Yeah. The funny thing
I know
is,
y'all gonna ask, like, what does Brian mean by it's a fallacy and flawed? I want to share your.
I get what you're getting at, because what I love about being black is this: I love the fact that we are the forever contradiction to white culture. Yes. Because particularly when I say white culture, I'm specifically talking about American culture. America does not have its own culture if not for black people. You do not get your own first original variation of a musical style without black people, which is jazz. And even if you want to say, oh, well, no, we have bluegrass, we have country. Bluegrass and country is still a derivative of the blues from free slaves who played the banjo that came from Africa that intermingled with poor whites to create a particular sound for people who were experiencing poverty in different ways by way of being white and by way of being black, that influence one over the other, right? And not to mention, America does not get its own first form of entertainment in the minstrels that are originally America, which is with the minstrels. White people wearing blackface, imitating and stereotyping based off of whatever we know their biases are, black people, as in, oh, well, black people, they're just not smart, oh, they're so ignorant, whatever. We give America a culture and an identity based off of their prejudices and their biases against us. So that's why I always love when I hear white people talk about certain things about, like, well, no, that's not true, and if it wasn't for white people doing this and that, you guys wouldn't be whatever. And I'm like, well, we've been the biggest source of your inspiration. Always, to this day.
Yeah, what did you know actor's name's better than me. Delroy Lindo. Did I say his name right?
Delroy Lindo.
What did Delroy Lindo say in a sentence? He said, they like the blues we make, just don't like the people who make it.
Exactly. Even to this day, like, you guys would like to tout out Nicki Minaj at your conventions because you love the fact that you have a black face that's speaking your particular language, but as soon as she talks anything different, it's a case of, oh, well, she's ignorant and she's ghetto and she likes to twerk and she talks about promiscuity and things of that nature.
The moment that it becomes a benefit to you,
she becomes your poster child.
Yeah, you can internalize racism to a place where, and that's a separate episode because it can have it does have negative aspects, but to the point where you perpetuate racism. Like black people, black, indigenous, people of color can perpetuate racism. That don't mean that they benefit from it at all. Look at Tim Scott. Recently, when Tim Scott said, this is the most racist thing that's come out of his White House, I hope it was a mistake, they were already online saying he needs to be fired. Even though he already got snubbed from an opportunity in administration, Trump didn't give him any. The majority of the black people who were out there campaigning for him didn't get an opportunity in administration. But what I'm saying is that black people can perpetuate it regardless of whether they receive a benefit from it. Benefit of it, I should say. There is a benefit from it. Like, for instance, Candace Owens gets Republican racist money. There is money on the
greatest grifter in a black American culture to this day.
Correct. There is money in the grift, but there's no power in the grift. I would like everybody to understand that distinction. You will get money because we need you out there to shuck, jive, and perpetuate the narrative.
You're so kind of cooning.
Yeah, cooning. Thank you so much. But you won't ever get into a position of power and influence, at least if we cannot control the power and influence. And in that regard, you're just being a token in that aspect. But when I was, something that you had said, and it's not fully back in my mind. When I said that it's a flaw and a fallacy, we were cheated out of our 40 acres and a mule. And then when we were released from the plantations and went into the Reconstruction era, into the Jim Crow era, we took all of our skills and actually built up our own communities. It's kind of crazy. Like, I saw on like TikTok the other day that they were like, well, why don't black people just live in their own and build their own communities? And I was like, it was a stitch. The guy came in and said, I know you can't be this dumb. You can easily Google this. Yeah. But most people don't notice that black people did try to create their own communities, and they created prosperous communities. If you ever Google this and just look it up, a lot of them were burnt down, attacked, people went in there and slaughtered them in the middle of the night, or turned into parks. Seneca Valley became Central Park, Rosewood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Lake Lanier. They were turned into lakes. Black people, by and large, have actually taken less and created so much more. But like you were saying, there were things that come into play. We invite too many non-friendly white people into white spaces, and they take, or they just simply get rid of, or they use the institutions that represents those systems that kind of erode it and push it away. That's what I mean by it is a fallacy in and of itself. And we are a constant reminder of that, because no matter how much they try to push us down, disenfranchise us, and punish us, we've always found a way to overcome. We've always found a way to grow. And yes, I will be the first to admit that, to what you were saying, black people are the dominant culture within America. I would even say globally, because the world watches the pain and the struggle of black people and imitate the beauty that we produce that comes out of it.
Yeah. Well, I would even take it, and not to belabor the point, I would take it even one step further towards, unapologetically saying this, looking at the camera saying this, black people have always been America's conscience. All men are created to be equal. Prove that to be true. As in, well, you guys wrote that. Oh yeah, we didn't necessarily have you guys in mind.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We were never considered people.
So then why would you write it? And if you wrote it and you put it in writing, you're saying this is your ideology, well, prove it to be true. And always having to push it to say, like, if you guys say you're about this, then prove it. Because what we're saying is that you're not. And we have evidence to show it by way of your treatment of us, your laws against us, and your behaviors in regards to, like, how you deal with us. And that's why, me personally, and I'm not going to apologize for it, I love being black. Because when I think about being black, I think about the fact that we're America's conscience, because we'll point out the hypocrisy. Well, if you're saying this is to be true, prove it. You wrote this in law. You said that this is the case. Now I'm here and I look different from you. Prove that to be true. And you can argue and say like, well, we didn't really mean you. You're not really American. But you brought me here. I didn't come here with my own fruition. I didn't come here off of my own desire. You brought me here. And now you guys are writing these laws because you want to make it seem as though to the rest of the world, the rest of your European brothers and sisters, that somehow or another you are the moral authority on humanity and what it is to be dignified and what it is to be humane and civilized. Prove that. Prove that. And that's what I love about being black, because that becomes our lineage and our history. It's like, well, you say that's the case, then prove it. Because here I am, human. This is how we get treated. This is disproportionality. These are the numbers that even the system that wants to say like this isn't the case even records of us.
No, I agree with that. Before I go, because I know you got something to do at 8, right? Don't you got to be out? Okay, all right. So I'll move into the next part. Okay, moving to the next part. I just want to ask her. So now that we've talked about white supremacy, systemic racism and institutional racism, I wanted to lay that as a foundation because I think that's important, because here's the thing that I've learned from studying systemic racism, right? The systems that are in place, let me say it this way. For those of you who are watching, I'm talking to Keith, but I'm also talking to you guys. There is one thing that's constant throughout the lifespan of somebody's lineage, right? Your grandfather and you and your children have many things in common, but there's one thing that's going to touch all 3 different generations, and that are the current systems that are currently in place that organize and inform society. So the reason why I started off with that is because if white supremacy is at the core ideology and the powering mechanism for systemic racism and the systems that we use to organize and touch our lives, that means that if it was founded in that ideology back when your great-grandparents were operating within that system, you are now dealing with the outcome and the consequences from the origins in which that system was founded. Brian, what are you saying? If it was rooted in racism, that when we created this system and we created these laws, that means down the line to your grandchildren and to your children's children's children, they're going to deal with the same exact systems that have the same exact ideology at the core, which means it has the same flaws. So if you do not work critically or intentionally to correct those systems, your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren are going to deal with the same issues that you're dealing with now, or even some of the issues that previous generations have dealt with. What does that mean to this day? We now have a situation where law enforcement is suspending due process, completely throwing out rights, completely trashing the Constitution just to achieve an agenda and go after people. Black people have been dealing with that for generations. The suspending of law in order to facilitate an arrest. The gaslighting with media and lying about what's going on in order to perpetuate a narrative or to perpetuate a cultural norm. Because when you say that we have all this information, but yet in historical data, but yet there's a picture that's painted or a narrative that's painted, to me that's the power of media, the institution of media, or the system of media in and of itself. It's bombards you with how you're supposed to look at things. So those systems that were created way back then, the ones that we talked about, they're still operating with the same ideology for today. And if we're not cautious about that and try to correct it, it will be the same thing years down the line, and we're going to run into the same problem. I just wanted to say that before I transition to the next part. Did you have anything you wanted to say? No. Because systems are like a handshake between that generation, this generation, and the next generation. So moving on to the next part, now that we've talked about those things, there's something I want to talk about. It's called the imperial boomerang. And I want to give everybody this definition because I think that in the current times, with everything that we see going on with ICE and the current administration, we're seeing this now. It's just that black people have been experiencing it, and now white people are experiencing it now. With the imperial boomerang, it means this. It is a political or social concept describing how methods of violence, surveillance, and dehumanization are used against marginalized populations, both domestically and abroad, but eventually return and shape domestic institutions. What do I mean by that? I am one of those black people that I like Black History Month. The reason why I understand the notion of Black history is American history, and I agree with that notion. I just think that when it comes to the Black experience and Black people and our history at large, there are certain mechanisms that need to be in place to try to level the playing field for us to get at least half, as Papa Pope says in Scandal, of what white people tend to get. So I'm not against the concept of Black History Month. I get the irony of it being in February. I get it. But I'm all for us taking 1 month out of the year to focus on the contributions of Black people. I also think that it should be a part of American history. And the reason why I say that is because remember how we said that earlier that the existence of Black people is a stain and smear to white supremacy. We are a constant reminder of how the fallacy of white supremacy isn't true. Well, when I say the imperial boomerang, that is what I'm referring to, because America is so concerned about not giving an accurate depiction of history in school and in the media. You are now seeing, unfortunately, white people being killed by law enforcement, and many white people saying to their chagrin that I didn't think this would happen. In that regard, everybody wants you to know, I'm quoting Andrew Schultz when he was like, I didn't think it could get this bad. Black people have known forever that it can always get this bad and worse. Yeah. I want everybody to know that it can get this bad and worse. But when you do not know your history as a society, you're not aware of just how bad it can go. Dr. Niyam Akbar is a psychologist, and he quoted, or at least I read in his book, it's called A Historical Past. Yeah. I'm so sorry, not historical past. It's called a historical future. That's what it's called. You have to understand your past to better understand where you are in the present so you can inform your future endeavors. Yeah. Because America has tried so hard to suppress and erase Black history and Black's contribution to America, we now find ourselves in this place of where we're experiencing the imperial boomerang. When we've been talking about how civil rights violations have been going on, systemic racism, the thing that we opened up with, structural racism, institutional racism, and the legacies and the outcomes that have perpetuated within our community for generations, we now find ourselves in a situation where the system in and of itself, the compilation of that, is now doing the same thing to those who do not have a Republican or white supremacist ideology and dehumanizing them. What am I talking about? I'm talking about what happened with Renee Good and Alex Preddy, where after they were shot and gunned down by law enforcement, white people are now seeing the gaslighting, the lying, the lack of accountability, the lack of any follow through. They're witnessing that, and for the first time, they're like, I didn't know it can get this bad. Where, like I said before, we have always been saying, oh no, it definitely can get this bad, and it can definitely get worse.
Well, you hit on something very powerful as far as what victim blaming looks like and who is considered a respectable victim in America, that Black people have long understood to be the case, all the way from, even before Emmett Till, but I would say specifically for Emmett Till, there becomes a justification of, well, that happened because he whistled at a white woman. All the way down to Philando Castile, where he tells the officers in the recording, hey, just let you know,
I'm armed and I have my permit.
I have my permit. And they're requesting this information. Okay, I'm reaching for it. And then he gets shot by a police officer who later on, when asked, well, why did you shoot him? The police officer says, I don't know. Right? So it becomes this justification as to why we can treat people this way because, okay, they're they're the proper victim versus not being the proper victim. And black people have always understood that. We've always understood that, even if you want to take a historical context, as to the bus boycotts in Montgomery, Alabama, how Rosa Parks becomes the face of it because she is this middle-aged, respectable black woman who is in her 40s, who's working, who's doing things, versus, I can't think of that, Coven, who's like, okay, well, this is wrong, who's a pregnant black teenager who refuses to give up her seat.
Correct.
We've always understood, even then, in American culture, for better or for worse, there is the justified victim who is worth dignity, who's worth respect, whereas we can hold them up and say, you can't treat us this way because look at this person, they're just as good as you, versus, oh, well, they made decisions that go against our dominant culture or our belief system, so therefore they should be treated however they get treated, and we kind of put them on the back burner. We've always known that. That's always been ingrained in our culture, to where as though we unfortunately see a Renee Good and Alex Petty, to where as though for us, even though we empathize deeply, we're like, this is nothing new. Correct. We have a long list of peers and ancestors to where as though they got killed by the state and by the system, and the system tried to tell us, well, there was a justification for it.
Correct.
They should have been more compliant. They shouldn't have been where they were at. They should have followed the rules.
Why can't they just do what they're told?
Exactly. As if like there's no long history that shows even when we comply and follow the rules, we still end up locked up, wrongfully convicted, or even worse, killed. And I think that when this happens, to your point, with white people, it becomes a shock. And the funny thing is about history is that people have the tendency of forgetting and then remembering, because even when we were talking about Renee Good and Alex Petty, I thought about the killing of the 3 civil rights workers who were registering people to vote in Mississippi, and 2 of them were white. And even to that, there was a white woman, I can't think of her name, please forgive me for not remembering her name, she was also killed, where that became the wake up for white people, as in like, that's just wrong. She's white, and yeah, we don't necessarily agree with the fact that she's trying to get black people to register to vote, or they're trying to get black people to register to vote, but they're us. They are us, and they got killed. This is totally unacceptable. Versus, how many Emmett Tills do we have? A lot.
Tamir Rice. When researching for this episode, it's actually really, really sad, if I could be honest with everybody, because there's a whole list
of us.
Yeah, like and forgive me, everybody, because Renee Good and Alex Petty weren't the only ones. It was Eric. Is it Starwell?
I think so, yeah.
Is his name Eric Starwell, who was shot in December by an off-duty ICE agent? But to your point, what you were getting at is, those are 2 systems interacting, right? Law and media in and of itself. What people are seeing now is that with Renee Good, they immediately jump to her wife, she's lesbian, or she was out there antagonizing. They literally tried to vilify her as if her lifestyle decisions that she wants to do, or how she was born, or anything like that played a matter, or
she's
or was
radical
a factor
because
in her getting killed.
She's radical because she's lesbian.
Correct. Like there was a level of when people were saying that, like, does any of that matter in regards to her being shot? Like people saw it. Everybody saw online. They tried to say that she almost ran him over with a car, but everybody, even law enforcement, looked at it and said no.
She pulled reverse, trying to get the hell out of there.
She was actually in reverse. The police officer stepped in front of the vehicle. She even turned her wheels that way, and they did an independent autopsy, I believe her family did, and found out that the first shot wasn't the kill shot. It was the last one that actually went into her neck and face area. And then you look at the situation with Alex Petty. Had his exercising his First Amendment and Second Amendment right. They disarm him, and then they go ahead and shoot him. And they were looking for any reason, the media was, to vilify and dehumanize this person. And I think that a lot of people are underestimating, or didn't know, let me say that even though we've been saying it for years, that those 2 systems are interacting in tangent the way that they historically have always been. Yeah. A bad encounter with law enforcement, because you're not capitulating or doing what is expected of you in this moment, resulting in you getting shot, and the media doing cleanup duty, because culturally it's shown that, well, if he's black, he or she, they must have done something. Oh, they had traffic tickets. Oh, they had negative interactions with law enforcement in the past. Oh, they were drug dealers. Oh, they failed their SATs or whatever. I think that now, because of what it happened to two non-black people, to two white people, now the greater society is saying like, whoa, you really laying this gaslighting on thick right now.
Because it's the identification. For Renee Good, whether you agreed with her being lesbian or not, you saw this woman who was a mom. Mm-hmm. And was very much into being a mom. Mm-hmm. With Alex Petty is a situation where white male who is a nurse who specifically wants
to
at the VA. Who works at the VA, who wants to support veterans. Mm-hmm. So now there's a strong identification, because what is not America, particularly white America, if it's not for veterans, well-being of those veterans, and being white and being male. Mm-hmm. So whereas now it becomes a situation of, to your point, even when the spin cycle happens from the institution to say like, well, and this is where they shot themselves in the foot, pun intended, well, he shouldn't have carried a gun to a peaceful protest.
Meanwhile,
and that doesn't sit well with white Americans, because it's like, we believe in our Second Amendment rights where we can carry a gun anywhere. And this man even was recording on camera letting you know he has a gun, he has the right to conceal it. And he still got shot, and you trying to still tell us that it's his fault? Because now we can identify and say like, well, that could have been us. Even if we were at like a insurrection trying to overthrow a vote, that could have easily been us.
Or if you're Kyle Rittenhouse showing up with a full-blown automatic rifle, or a semi-automatic rifle strapped to your chest with
exactly.
a magazine in it.
When it's someone who fits your phenotype or who fits into your culture, you can't help but have to pause, be forced to pause and say, this is problematic, because now we're realizing the powers that be, it isn't even about what I thought was about me. It was just more so about being in the defense of themselves. When you know that you campaign a part of it on the Second Amendment, and now you're trying to tell us that people who lawfully own guns can't show up to places with those said guns as long as they're following state rules?
Yeah. But ultimately, everybody, we're getting at is that's vicarious trauma, what a lot of people are now witnessing, that black people have been experiencing for a long time. That there is a psychological impact of repetitively witnessing negative situations secondhand that occur to people, whether you're seeing it, hearing about it, whatever it may be. But when you consume it, it's there. Yeah. That's what people are contending with when they're now looking at, when I say people, I'm actually referring to white people. When you look at Renee Good, Alex Petty, you're now seeing that this can also happen to you if you do not fall in line. But black people have been saying it for generations, that this happens in our community all the time, that if we do not course correct these systems and try to find some way to get out the white supremacist racist toxin that's infiltrated them, you're going to run into this more and more. So I just wanted to say that in closing, because vicarious trauma is a real thing. Take a break from what you look at the media sometimes in order to recharge your battery, to get back to some sense of regulation and healing. But that concludes our episode for today. And as usual, hope you got something out of it. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that little bell notification icon in order for you to get the notifications when a new episode drops. And also, if you are looking for a therapist for mental health services, someone to talk to, please look at our website at www.forustherapeutic.org, and one of the members of our team or even ourselves will work with you and get you from point A to point B, from surviving to thriving. And in closing, I'm your host, Dr. B.
Dr. LaKeith.
And we'll see you here next time.